Welcome back to my game dev series. One of the changes that I've made since the last video is I've split out the animations for my sprites. So how it used to be was I did not have this animation type. These variables were down here kind of lumped in with the sprite struct. And so regardless of if a sprite had multiple animations, it would still leverage these same variables, and it would just reset those every time. So if you were doing the walk animation for the main player, it would leverage each of these so it would know what frame you're on, how many total frames, and to keep track of at what point it was in the animation. And animation speed here is one of the big ones, because if you had two animations, which the main character does, it has the walk animation and the chopping animation. The animation speed would be the same for both of those. So what I've done was just pull out those animation specific variables and put them into its own struct. So now every sprite will have an unordered map of animations. So you can just call an animation by a string name that you give it, and it will run through that animation. And we set the current animation for a sprite, so it will retain that and it'll know which one it should be using at any given time. That does kind of increase the amount of code that I had to do in my initialization of different types. So for my player, you can see here that I am initializing two different animations. That being said, that really does help extricate some of that logic, and it allows me to eventually, if I feel like it, kind of build out that logic in a second application. So that the map editor that I'm building, that could be more of a general purpose engine as opposed to just map editing. Then I could save data for animations or triggers or whatever else I need in game, and then save those to a proprietary format and load those into game, and then those would just get mapped essentially to this. So this I wouldn't even need to initialize this verbosely like this. I would just have whatever process that loads up the map data kind of build all that out. So that I think was the most significant change since the last video. And I didn't really record all that just because it was a little bit of monotony and tedium to get it to this point. The change was fairly simple, but actually doing it took probably an hour. So one of those things where the scope of the game changed a little bit, and so the behind the scenes stuff had to change to accommodate that. You can see I sped up my character's run animation a little bit, so it kind of looks like he's on meth or something. The chop is still the same right now. You can move around a little bit faster. Now what I wanted to do today was begin looking at a simple inventory system. And as you can imagine, since you can already chop trees and pick up wood or get wood from that process, we already have a concept of an item, and that wood is that concept. So I think what I want to do first, and I'm just kind of making this up off the cuff, I've never programmed an inventory system before, so I don't know exactly what I need, and I don't know what that interface is going to look like. But let's find our wood type in here, if I even have one. No, I don't. So that's just an integer that gets stored in stats right now. But I think we go above our player type and do a new struct inventory, we can kind of think about what we would need for that. So the first and most obvious thing, I think, is a name. Every item needs a name. And for the case of an inventory, we need a count, so we can keep track of how many of that item that we have. Something else I had considered was every item will probably have a graphic associated with it. I don't think I would have individual graphics, so they wouldn't all be an individual PNG file, but they would be all combined into probably an image map of sorts. I don't envision right now having animations for items. I think they'll just be static one-frame entities on screen, just for keeping it simple right now. And I can always go back and reassess that and change things as I need to. Yeah, I think there will be a difference between like an animated world object, so say like a fountain or a windmill or something, versus an item that you can pick up to have in your inventory. And I think those inventory items will be static for right now and not have animations associated with them. So what we can do is store an integer, which will be the tile position. That'll tell us what position within that item's tile map that this item will take, I guess. So name, count, tile position. Now, depending on what we want these items to do, if you want to be able to sell them, I guess you could have either an int or a float. Let's just do an int cost. So that would be a money amount, and I don't feel the need to go into dollars and cents there. It can just be like, how much gold is this worth? So that would just be a plain integer whole number. Then we need to consider whether an item should increase or decrease certain statistics about the player. So that would be their health, defense, speed, luck. Basically the same stuff that you see in this battle stats structure. I think eventually I want to get to that point. So why don't we put that in for right now, but we'll comment it out just so we have a placeholder, but then we don't have to focus on implementing that so soon into this process. Because right now what I want to focus on is associating the inventory with the player and then potentially coming up with some type of UI that we can implement so you can view your items, scroll through them, whatever the case may be. So I think this looks alright for right now. We'll go with those 4 attributes. And why don't we go ahead and let's see what this item struct is. Item T. It looks like I already had an item struct, but I don't think I'm actually using that right now, or am I? I'm not sure. So let's go to our player code items is not getting initialized. I remember seeing that before. Item is apparently a very popular keyword in a lot of code bases. I'd love to just see my code here. So dev mode, oh right, so we're storing, here let me let me set my dev mode so I can demo this. Debug is 1. Let me uncomment this stuff. I remember now that I had started building out a mild form of an inventory because I needed to do so to move the game along. You can see here my inventory has no items in it. If I chop this dude, you collect his moldy bones. And then turn off my collision here for a second. The moldy bones are actually a key item in the game that I'm triggering different events off of. So this teleport gnome behind the scenes, to kind of manage his state, he checks to see if you have the moldy bones item. When he sees it, you can see that the inventory item changed to ogled moldy bones, so he saw that you had those. I'm supposed to collect wood for him. Well, anyway, you get the idea. So I do have that concept of an inventory. I can probably leverage that instead. So item T, name, value would have been cost. We'll keep value because that makes more sense. Int count was down there. Int tile position. And the battle stats. So let's remove that for right now. Now where this item gets generated, I'm not sure. So it looks like each actor can hold an item, which is uninitialized right off the bat. Or is it? Let's look at our implementation of the intro skeleton, because he's the one who has that moldy bones item. Okay, so this item, moldy bones, here, let's type this out more verbosely. Name equals moldy bones. This item value was 0 because those were the only two attributes I had before. This item, our type file is not here now. Count is 1. So item tile position. We don't have any. We don't have any graphics for this right now, so I'm going to set the tile position to -1, just to initialize it to something that will not be useful in the future. So if I do add some graphics, which I will, this one will essentially break in the UI, and we'll be able to see that it's not rendering a graphic like it's supposed to. We can come back here and then note that is the case. Or in fact, I could just put in to do like a smart person would. Change tile position when we get graphics for items. And then battle stats is not a thing right now, so we will ignore that. One thing that I'm considering right now as well is we need to track whether or not you can get rid of or sell or destroy this item. So I'm going to give that a Boolean, and I'm going to call it quest item for now. And then anything flagged as a quest item you must retain, because that's actually being used for in-game logic. I'll do that. Quest item equals true. So post talk. Now, when I kill that enemy, I pick up that item. How does that happen? I think in our engine we have the interaction code. Stuff happens. Update actors. Maybe our trigger code does it. Okay, here we are in strike. This is where we chop the intro skeleton. If his health is greater than 0, we do our chopping stuff and we remove some health from the enemy. And then here is the case where he dies. Showing is false. Items in place. So we emplace the item that comes from the actor. I think we could arguably change our player items here. Player has items. It's a multi-map right now. I don't think we really need it to be that. Arguably, I think it could be a vector. Although well, I'd still like to be able to access the items by a string key. So basically the item's name would be that key. So why don't we just change this to unordered map. And I do want to change that to inventory. So I wonder if this is going to be smart enough to do that for me. Trace or replace those. Save, please. Control S means save, but my icon didn't change. There we go. Let's see if items comes up anymore in my code here. Dev mode, so it didn't change dev mode. Intro skeleton, teleport gnome, inventory, 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 inventory. Map, it did not change those instances. That looks like it should be it. Island, CPP is not mine. There's some STL stuff in there. That's just a string. That's a comment. Okay. And the reason that I changed that to an unordered map instead of a multi-map is that now if you add an item to the inventory, that item will be unique based on the key, and we can just increment the count as we get more of that item. Right, so I don't know what I was thinking before when I had that as a multi-map, because a multi-map means that you can have multiple of the same key. And I was probably thinking, oh, if you pick up, you know, 2 items named sword, you can have both of those in your inventory, and then when you're trying to do an overall count, you just loop through the inventory and kind of tally up the counts for each item. Well, that's not a very great way to do it. And in fact, now I can remove that multi-map include, because I think this was the only place that I was using it. I need to change my iterator as well. Unordered map. And there should be an include probably in boreal.h for unordered multi-map. Unless that happens, multi-map might come from unordered map. I'm not quite sure on that, but I guess it doesn't matter because I'm not finding multi-map in my code anywhere else right now. So that problem is solved. Let's do a build quick and see what happens. We should be pretty close to good. If I run this, I should still have no items in my inventory to start. I can kill this guy, and I get an item in my inventory. That's good. So one thing that I'm going to want to do next is we want wood to be an inventory item, because we want to be able to probably sell that. I mean, we can already use it to build fires, but that's all of that code is really kind of custom, I guess I would say. It's not really like a generic, you use this item kind of thing. It's like, no, this is a core action, I guess. Whereas if wood was just an item, then you can use it or sell it or whatever, kind of in more of a generic way, if that makes any sense. And I suppose the idea of an item in a game is a little bit nebulous, but we will kind of go with this. So we technically now have an inventory just by virtue of having changed it to an unordered map calling it inventory in the first place, and then having a count for items, and having some other attributes. I think we should look at kind of pulling out the fire count somehow, and then adding that into our, or having every piece of wood, I guess, be an item, and then when you build a fire, that will decrease that wood count from your item inventory. So to do that, first we need to what do we need to do first? I suppose somewhere it would be helpful to store some definitions of items in the first place, you know, just so we can reference back to those and not have to create those every time. Or I suppose you would only be creating them one time, the first time that you collect it, and then if you get more of that item, you simply increase the count. Or say you have, well, why am I using Notepad? I haven't had it right here. So say we have an item, name equals wood, count equals, let's say 4, because that can be randomly generated, and we'll not worry about all the other attributes. And tree holds this. So our tree object will hold this wood item, I suppose. Now player holds this. I already have, say, a wood item in my inventory. My count is what, 150 to start out with? Now, if I'm chopping the tree and I finish chopping it and I pick this up, obviously I don't want it to just overwrite this. I want to essentially merge these, and to do that I would first need to check if I have this item in my inventory. So if player chops tree, then check if dropped item in inventory. If yes, this is not even pseudocode, so let's not go down that route. If yes, merge items, that is, add counts together. No, add item to inventory. And that's really it. I think that makes sense. So in our engine, we try indirect front. Indirect front. We're chopping and playing our sound. Map, try to. Let's see if we can F12 that. For whatever reason, it's not popping up the definition, which is kind of annoying. So in our indirect front, iterating over trees, changing the state of them, blah blah blah. So if the health of the tree goes below 0, so you effectively chopped it down, we erase that from our map, which we are currently iterating over, it looks like. So I don't know why that never blows up, but that's okay. And here's where the item collection happens. So this is what we need to update. Effectively, we have kind of two ways of doing this. We can either hard code our player just merging this new wood count with whatever he has, and he might not have any wood yet at this point, so we need to check for that. Or else we can start looking at making this a little bit more generic, because this interaction code is going to get a lot more complex as we add more items into the game. So I think probably what needs to happen is our tree here needs to have an item. Item count is going to be this randomly generated integer. So that is between 3 and 7, as you can see. Item name is wood. I can probably give that a proper capitalization there, since we might use that for display later. Quest item is false. Tile position. So, okay, in our assets, we don't have, well, we do have an object map. That's slightly different, I guess. We might want equivalent for items, but I do recall that right now we do have a wood icon. So I think we can probably copy that into a different file and use that, but we still won't have a position for that yet. So I'm going to set that to -1 and put a to do in there as well. Value, that I'm not sure. How should we generate base values for items? Like, do we want this to be scriptable later on so I can set those without having to come into the code and recompile it? I don't know. Let's just set it to 10 for right now. I don't know. And if you consider that different vendors might have a different idea of what they value wood to be, like if you go to a blacksmith, they probably don't put a high value in that, but if you go to a carpenter, they would put a bit of a higher value on that. I don't know. We'll have to come back to that too. Wow, 2 to-dos in one place. Well, there's just a lot to do in a game. reassess how we want to associate values to items. Okay, so now that we have an item configured, we want to have a way to make our player pick that up and essentially merge the item with whatever he may already have in his inventory. And at risk of adding more crap to our triggers, I might just add a new function for that. Because this has been kind of the catch-all. Whether or not I like it, I haven't known what else or where else to put some of this code. So we have teleport, strike, interaction, yes, no dialogue, blah, blah, blah. And it's not... You want to plan ahead for certain potentialities, but you don't want to overbuild something so that you have kind of a bunch of cruft in place for things that you thought you would need, but you never end up actually utilizing it or needing it in the future. So you don't want to really build things until you need them, but there's a fine line there because some things you just can actually anticipate. But I'm having a difficult time anticipating some of this item collection stuff because I don't really envision having other actors in game with inventories, so I don't necessarily think that I need a way for them to collect or merge items into their own inventory. But I do need that for the player. So I think for right now, I can, in my player, I already have that open, in my player, or not class, but module, I can probably make a function in here that's like collect item. Why don't we just call it that? Collect item. Types item t item. Do we want to pass that in as a reference, or we'll just do that how that is right now. That'll probably be fine. So in this case, this is really the line that needs to change significantly. These are just statistics, so we can probably keep those for just posterity here, because we do display those at the end of the game. Now if we didn't really we do want to keep those because that's a cumulative statistic. So even if you chop wood and collect it and then use it and keep chopping more wood, that's going to keep a running total of all the wood that you've collected, not just what you have in your inventory at the end of the game. So we do have to keep those. This is the main line that needs to be abstracted a little bit, and so what we're going to do is state player collect item, and we'll pass the item in there. And of course I need this to be in the header as well. So there we go. And kind of like I had outlined here, we first need to check if the item is in our inventory. let's find correct. So item name, else. So if it is in our inventory, we do something. If not, we do inventory in place, item name, and item. So the item name in this case will be wood, and the item itself is just that struct. Now if we do have that in our inventory, what we would want to do is increase the count. So state player inventory, and you can access those by key. So the key here is item name, and then the count plus equals item count. I think that should be good. So collect item, and then let me see, because we display that. That used to be this. And I think that needs to go away now. Because now all these places that we check for player.wood, we need to update those instances to check the inventory. So one other function we might like to do is check inventory. That would not pass back a void, would it? We probably want to get a count for that. So int, let's just call it inventory count. And then we can pass in a key. And for that, if state player inventory find key. So if we find that item, we want to return the count, else return 0. Now we'll find, what does find give us if it does not actually find that item? Return value an iterator to the element if the specified key is found, or end if it is not. So I don't know if this logic is actually going to, well, we need to do something like this. We need to check if we're not at the end of the iterator. And this, we need to do the same thing here. I don't know why I used find again, because we can access that item by name at that point. So that should be a little bit better. Need end on that as well. So we will need to pull that out, but let's just see if it compiles with these new functions. Collect item is not a member of types player T. $185. State player, right, because we are not accessing it that way. We are doing it that way by calling the actual module itself in that namespace. $187 plus equals wood. And that would be item count, which is that. So that should clear up those, I believe. You can hear my fan plugging away while it's compiling there. Okay, so now we collect items. Back in our engine here, we want to change this player, what was that called? Inventory count. Inventory count wood. So player inventory count wood is greater than or equal to 25. Map place fire. That is a thing that we'll need to update as well. So place fire. Collision, blah blah blah, fire in place. So this is the line here that needs to get replaced. And I think, again, one more function is in hand. That'll be we're going to call it use inventory item, maybe. Key and an amount would be useful here. So ideally with this function we should already have checked if the inventory item exists. I don't know if that's too much to ask for, but being that this is my code, maybe I can assume that. If we need to validate usage of this function, we'll just put that in as a note for now. But just to get things going, we will assume that the item is in our inventory and that the amount that we want to use is available to be used. Which would hold true because the only place that I'm actually using this function right now is in the fire building process. And as you saw before, we are checking the inventory beforehand, so that should be fine. And if we need to update that assessment later on, we can do that. But what we need to do here is just decrease the count of that item, essentially. So state player inventory key count minus equals amount. That really should be it. So again, we will add that to our header. Goes back in map. So player use inventory item. That was wood. 25. I think that should be it. Icon wood, wood. Stats, wood, that's fine. Inventory count, we just made that player wood. So initializing our player, I cannot any longer initialize our wood like that, because in fact that variable needs to go away from player T. So there we go. Wood taken, that's something else. Wood, wood, wood. Wood icon, that's the status bar. Yeah, so the status bar here is checking for player wood, but what we can do once again is change this to player inventory count wood. Now we'll get the count of however much wood there is. We'll close this. Types of wood collected. Okay, so I think that takes care of all the references to that variable that we've removed. So if we build this, I must have missed one or two. Teleport gnome. Interesting. Why is he? Oh, right, because he checks to see how much wood we have, so we can give him some, so he will teleport us. So that is name, player inventory count. That's a bit different. So what line is this? 49. Okay. So again, player inventory count wood. And this line needs to change to player use inventory item wood 100. That should clean that up just fine. That looks good. So our wood count looks fine. The moldy bones are inventory. As I chop the trees, I'm getting wood. So that count is going up, and you can see in my inventory wood is there as well, which is nice. So if I turn collision off, go for the easy trees here, because I gotta get up to 150 to appease my gnome. Should almost make a single chop kill for these, just for testing purposes. That would be kind of cool. But we're almost there. So that's 150. So we talk to him. You see our inventory change to ogled moldy bones. We give him 100 wood. Use some wood. Now what we don't have right now, but we can do in the future, is a way to completely remove an item from the inventory. In fact, I can probably whip that up really quick. Let me close some of these. So that would be void remove inventory item. String key. And quick, again, add that to our header. Now that's just remove, I think. If that item does not exist, will it blow up if you try to erase it? Return value. Returns the number of elements erased, which in unordered map containers that have unique keys, which ours do. This is 1 if an element with a key value of k existed, and this was subsequently erased, and 0 otherwise. So if the key does not exist, we can still call this function and it should not blow up, which is good. I don't think that's quite how that works. My map erase. So that's what we want. So that should be good. And I think we can leverage this in use inventory item. So if state player inventory key count equals 0, we'll just call remove inventory item. I think that'll be all right. It might be a little bit difficult to test this because I don't have a good way to set my wood count to an exact number that'll allow us to round it down to 0. So let's just quick see if we can land on 25 wood. 26. Oh, there we go. So we have 25 wood now. If I build a fire, conceptually it should now remove wood from our inventory, which it does. So that's what I like to see. I'm happy right now with that as an inventory system. What I want to look at next in the future is getting some kind of inventory UI so you can see on screen what you have and cycle through items or whatever you want to do with them, kind of manage that inventory somehow. So if you've made it to this point, I thank you for watching, and hopefully you will stick around to the next video.